During the one began, I looked through the list of upcoming anime, and being the isekai junkie that I am, I looked through what was going to be this season's isekai. And one of those isekai managed to blow my mind. And it's an incredible show. There is a lot to like. A really great world, quite unique plot, and an amazing, spunky spider protagonist. Yes, I was talking about Mushoku Tensei. Hi there, Diti here, and today we're talking about So What and Aspire. And if you are looking to watch a video about Mushoku Tensei, sorry, but this ain't it. I'd really love to make a video on Mushoku Tensei, but the show hasn't really hit its stride. Don't get me wrong, it is leagues above any new isekai that has come out in recent years, but it's only on its prologue. I mean, we haven't even discovered a fraction of the world, or even fully grasped the size, the sheer mass of their world, or where the plot is going. So at this point, I'm not really looking to make a video on it, but So What I'm Aspire was a show that I did not expect to wow me in the beginning when I watched the first few episodes, but now that I'm like 11 episodes into the movie, I'm in love with it. I have this basic rule that most people who watch anime have of the 3-episode rule. You watch the first 3 episodes, if you don't like it, you quit, because you shouldn't really be wasting your time. But like most people, I'm not looking for something to wow me in the first 3 episodes. As long as it's not horrible, I would watch the most generic shows in existence, which I thought So What If I'm Inspired was. Because from the get-go, you wouldn't think there was anything unique about it, because the first episode begins and it's a very generic yet scenic day in everyday Japan. They're in high school, so the typical isekai shonen protagonist setup, and boom, they get isekai. So you're like, okay, that just happened. And the protagonist wakes up and it's a girl. So you're like, okay, that's a bit different from other shonens. Then she's a spider, and you're like, okay, that's definitely different from other shonen. But then she goes around freaking out, trying to level up, and you're like, this is literally the first episode of Slime Isekai. And it is. And you're like, okay, I've seen this before. So you're not really impressed. But then it turns out that her other classmates that were in the same class as her, because they're her classmates, were also isekai, and they are now princes and nobles of whatever kingdoms or empires that are there in that world. And then you get more of an Arufureta vibe from the show, where the main protagonist is stuck down in a dungeon, struggling to survive, having to eat what is pretty disgusting food to maintain themselves and get stronger, while their other classmates are up in the world above, living their best life. So from that, you move on to the second and third and fourth episodes, where you see the comparisons between the two realities that existed. So at this point, the show is seemingly a combination of Slime Isekai and Arufureta, in the way that the scenes where the protagonist is the focus of the show, it seems like the early few episodes of Slime Isekai where Rimaru is adapting to the world, growing and learning new skills. And whenever you see the other classmates shown in the series, it feels like a scene from Arufureta, where it's a comparison of how they're living, where her friends, her classmates actually, are living up in the world of luxury and comfort, eating fancy banquets, where she's having to rely on cannibalism not to starve to death. And they are learning swordsmanship and magic in a controlled environment where it's safe and comfortable. And she has to learn all this stuff on the fly, or else she dies. And every encounter she has is a life or days encounter. And on the other hand, they're living very comfortable and cushy lives. So far, what they were doing was interesting, but it wasn't really incredible. It's not really a selling point of the show to have a dual narrative, where if somebody asked why I would like So What I'm Spider, I would say that, it has a dual narrative, where the main focus of the story is how our main girl is trying to escape the labyrinth, but it also shows what's happening in the world outside. That's really not a selling point for a show. I didn't really see what was so incredible about the show until the 9th episode. And I'm not telling you to watch until the 9th episode to find out why it's good. It's actually really entertaining, and the parts that I really like were there from the first episode, but I failed to realize what was happening because I thought it was a generic show and I wasn't paying a lot of attention. And the part of the show that threw me off was that the show was really self-aware. It knew what kind of show it was. It knew the kind of audience it was broadcasting to, or it was appealing to. So the parts that seemed like jokey, or like the whole show was kind of like this big gag or this big twist on the whole isekai protagonist genre, made you feel like the whole show is kind of something you watch and you turn your brain off. So until the 9th episode, I didn't really realize what's happening. But when I did, I had to re-examine everything I knew about the show, or the things I thought I knew. So before I tell you what happens in the 9th episode, I'll give you a brief overview of what happens in every episode. So starting from episode 1, I mentioned this earlier, they're in a classroom, they get isekai, right? The main protagonist wakes up and she's hatching from her egg for the first time. She realizes she's a spider. She goes on to explore the lower stratum of the Great Labyrinth. And on the other side of the world are her friends, and they're attending a dinner party for their admission into the Magical Academy. Then the next episode, we see her getting bullied when the show begins. Then later it shifts over to the isekai world, where we see the protagonist of the secondary narrative, which is the prince, whose name I don't know, so we're going to call him Prince. So you see the prince interacting with the other members of the class who were reincarnated with him, which consists of an elf, another prince, a saint, his friend, which was a dude that got reincarnated into a girl, but people are getting reincarnated into spiders, and the other one, a dragon. And the person that was reincarnated to a dragon was the person who was bullying the main character in the beginning of the episode. So you see them hanging out. So let's skip back to the labyrinth, where our protagonist leveled up for the first time, and she realizes that this world is somewhat like a game. It has levels, it has skills, and the more skill points you have, the more skills you can unlock, the more powerful you can be. And she stumbles onto a human. And you think that this being an isekai should be fond of humans or should want to be with a human, but in the first episode, she found human footprints. When she followed them, she found the carcass of a spider, and she realized that yes, in this world she is a monster, and if she came across humans, they were going to kill her because that's what humans do. That's what adventurers do. That's what isekai movies are based off of. It's not going to be like one of those idyllic isekai protagonists like Rimuru in Slime Isekai, where even though he's a monster, he instructs his followers not to attack humans because he likes humans. That's a different kind of show. And the human had a dragon egg with him, and he was trapped, and when he was trying to get away, he left the dragon egg behind, and our lovely protagonist wanted to eat the egg, but she later realized that she couldn't because that egg belonged to a dragon, and a measly spider monster couldn't crack an egg of a dragon. So she decided to make herself comfortable in the labyrinth. She made herself a home. But the thing was, the human that had escaped came back with reinforcements, and they burned down her house, and they took back the egg that she was trying to live with. And then that attack prompted our main protagonist to escape and hide, and she realized that she was weak and vulnerable, and she had to find a way to protect herself and get strong. So she does exactly that, and in the end of the episode, she evolves for the first time. And that shows you that animals, or like monsters in the show, the more powerful they are, they can evolve to higher orders of the same species that attain more power. That is going to be relevant later in the show. So in the third episode, the focus primarily is on the prince. Not the whole episode, but the most significant events are related to the prince. So the prince and his class go on a trip, and in that trip, they come across a dragon that attacks them, and they have to defend themselves. Prince and the other people who are isekai with him and his companions team up to defeat an earth dragon, making the prince a dragon slayer. But that event causes some tension between the two princes that were reincarnated into the world. Our protagonist and what had appeared to be his rival in the beginning of the show, but now he's building up to be the villain of that plotline. But in that same episode, the protagonist realizes that the highest level a monster could be is a level 10. And the way that works is whenever the monster reaches level 10, it gets the chance to evolve to a higher monster. So it resets its level back to a level 1, but it's a stronger monster. With that realization, she becomes overconfident, cocky even. So when she's strutting around, she comes across some of the most powerful creatures that are in the lower stratum, and she realizes that she's a tiny, tiny fish in a vast ocean. That realization prompts her to hide and avoid confrontation with the other monsters, which directly contradicts her earlier resolution in the previous episodes to get stronger and not to run away from her problems. But she does because her problems are going to kill her. So we go to the fourth episode. Until now, the protagonist, by risking her life, was able to defeat the weakest monsters to eat them. But after realizing how weak she actually was, she had avoided all confrontations. So she was reduced to eating rotten insects. And this episode primarily focused on our protagonist, Spider Girl, where the previous episode primarily focused on the prince. In this episode, the spider is forced to scrounge for food until she comes across a monkey. And when she kills that monkey, she inadvertently causes disaster on herself because monkeys in the labyrinth hunt in packs. And when she killed him, he sent a signal to his pack to avenge him, and they came for her. And she thought that she could resolve the situation by showing them that it was futile, that they might be able to kill her, but they might lose dozens or even hundreds of them might be dead by the time they have achieved it, so it would be futile. And she perceived that they would be intelligent enough to grasp that and leave her alone. But at the end, she realized that they weren't going after her for logical reasons or anything else. It was kill or be killed down there, and there was no logic. Anything that was a threat to them had to be killed, even if it was one lowly spider. So her understanding of logic or reason and how people reason things out in the world she came from doesn't really work in this world because you can't reason with things that want to kill you. And the episode is just her finding her resolve and realizing that she can't escape or run away from all her problems. Until the end of the episode where she makes it into the middle stratum and she realizes that there are even more powerful creatures in the stratum and she runs away again. But in the fifth episode, she realizes that if she wants to get out of the labyrinth, she will inevitably have to go through the middle stratum and later on the higher stratum. So the fifth episode is basically the fourth episode, but instead of monkeys, now she's fighting lava creatures. Basically, it's her evolving even further. Basically, the same thing that happens in the fourth episode happens in the fifth episode, but it's more entertaining because it's not a horde of monsters coming at her, it's just a one-on-one fight, so it's more entertaining to watch. So nothing much happens outside of that until the very end of the episode where the hero of the world goes into the labyrinth where she is, and he's about to enter the middle sanctum. So now we're at the 6th episode, and the hero of the world is the princess' older brother, who the prince looks up to. And he went into the labyrinth because he received a mission to slay a spider monster that was affecting the biome of the labyrinth. And he's going to the middle sanctum to kill a powerful spider monster. And our protagonist is in the middle sanctum. You're thinking that the hero is going to kill the spider, right? I thought that, but in the next episode it turns out that it's not our hero that is going after. She gets to live another day. So basically we just see what the hero is capable of. Him and his party face the monster. They have a little chat before facing the monster. They go kill the monster. Basically, that's the whole episode. The interesting part about that episode is that at the very end, the demon lord is shown. And until this point, you only see a small part of the world. You only see the protagonist and what she's going through in the labyrinth and the academy the kids are in. You don't know anything outside of that. When they show the demon lord, it expands the world to the point where you realize that there are two sections of the world, like the human realm and the demon realm. And that realization builds into what's going to be the main part of the plot. And with that, we move on to the 7th episode. By this point, the main character, the spider, has leveled up a lot and evolved several times. So at this point, she does a bit of introspection. So far from her many leveling ups and her many evolutions, she has gained many skills, but because she doesn't have anybody to explain what skills are, how they function, and what they do to her, she didn't know what anything she had was. While she's trying to figure all that out, the story switches over to the prince and what he's doing, and the academy is taking them on another field trip after they survived an attack from the dragon. Smart move, good educational system. So earlier I said that the princess rival was going to be the villain of the current plotline, which he is, because on the field trip he arranged to have the prince, the character we're following, to be assassinated because he had a world view of the current world they were occupying after they got isekai of the typical isekai protagonist, as in he was hand selected to be isekai because he's something special. And so when he was about to off the prince, the elf intervenes and stops him and tells him that you're not special and this world is not meant for you. And she strips him of his skills, and she says that skills are dangerous, and he is devastated. And later that night he vows to take revenge on the elf and on the prince, which solidifies that he was going to be the villain. And while all that is happening, the spider is back in the labyrinth still trying to figure out her skills. And when she was trying to do that, she stumbles on a very minor detail that leads to a big revelation in the plot, which is that her skills were given to her by an administrator D. And when she was thinking about it, and she really took the time to think about it, the fact that she was in this world that was similar to a game started to crumble, and she realized that this isn't an MMORPG or some fantasy reality. This world was a game created by administrators, and they are characters that the administrators are using as chess pieces to move the plot forward. And that revelation terrified her. And that revelation was what started to get me invested in the story. And that fact about administrators becomes great when you go into the next episode, the 9th episode. But before we get to the 9th episode, let's cover the 8th episode briefly. What happens in the 8th episode? She learns how to use magic and she kills a dragon. Yes, a spider kills a dragon. Now on to the 9th episode. So this episode is the one that really made me fall in love with the show because of how interesting it was and how it flipped the story on its head. So what happened was the hero goes to the academy to see his younger brother, and they're having a sweet brotherly moment. And they are talking about current events, and he's asking him about his day, and the younger brother, the prince, looks up to his big brother because he's his role model. And after all that happened, the dragon, the princess, had made a comment about the hero's scarf, and he told her that the scarf was made from a spider's web, and that spider's den, the material for the scarf was taken from, was also where they found her egg, and that's when they brought her home to be raised and be the princess' pet. But when that's happening, the flashback is of the main character's home being burned down in the 2nd episode. And then you have to pause and say, wait, what's happening? Because we have a very linear understanding of time. There's the past, the present, and the future, and things flow in that order. So in a movie, when you are presented scenes flowing from the 1st to the 2nd to the 3rd to the 4th episode, you automatically assume that things that happen in the 1st episode precede the events of the 2nd episode, and so on and so forth. But this little throwaway line that I almost didn't notice is telling you that events in the 2nd episode precede events in the 1st episode. Then you have to really look at the events that were happening, of the things that were happening in the labyrinth and how the students in the academy were faring, and you have to realize the stories that were being told aren't concurrent. They're not happening at the same time or even within a short time frame. That moment makes you realize that the events of what's happening down in the labyrinth and what's happening above ground are separated by 15 years. So the series is actually telling two separate stories at the same time, and they're screwing with your perception of time, or at least your perception of the flow of time within the movie, because they only mention the places they are at in passing, and they don't give you time frames of when something is happening, as in this is happening on Monday, the year, the time frame. There is no calendar to work off of. You only understand the place they are in. And the reason I said the things that makes a show interesting, Ajay, from the beginning, is that the fact that those events were happening 15 years apart was evident right from the get-go, but I didn't figure it out because I wasn't paying attention. And it's like that from the get-go, because the first episode during the banquet, where they were meeting each other for the first time, the two princes and the saint and the prince's best friend, the person introducing them was an elf, and the prince's younger sister inquired to the identity of the elf, and the prince told her that she is a friend of them, and as the audience knows that she was somebody who was reincarnated alongside them. And he tells her that she is also 15 years old, the same as him, but she looks young because she is an elf, and elves age different from humans. And later it is revealed that the elf was actually their teacher in their former life, and the teacher is obviously older than them, but when they got reincarnated, they all were born at the same time or within a similar time frame, so all of them were the same age. So it doesn't make sense that the spider would be reincarnated when they were attending the academy, because they were 15 years old enrolling in the academy, and that was when she hatched from the egg. So if you put those two simple bits of information together, that the events that are seen in the labyrinth were from 15 years ago, and that everybody that was reincarnated 15 years prior, you realize that the events that are happening don't really make sense as a linear story. So you realize you're watching two stories unfolding at the same time, not the same story of two events happening within a similar time frame, or within a short amount of time, or within a short distance of each other. And what further proves the fact that the stories linked is later in the episode. Well, before we get to that, the princess, while they were talking, the hero tells the younger prince that there could be war between the humans and the demons if he doesn't do something to intervene. So he was going to go to the border to the demon realm to see if there is something that he could do. While he leaves, the episode goes back to the labyrinth where the spider was fighting the dragon, and she had killed the dragon. While that was happening, an administrator was monitoring the dragon, and he noticed that the dragon had vanished, and he thought that something went awry because there wasn't anything powerful enough to kill a dragon in that area, so he went to investigate. So while she was chilling, she felt a sense of dread, but before she could even attempt to escape, the administrator was right next to her using special magic. So they had a conversation, which is very spoilery, so I won't tell you about it. But the thing is, the next scene right after that is in the demon realm, where the demon lord was planning an attack on the human realm. So the prince's suspicion of there being an upcoming war was correct, and the demon lord was planning that excursion to the human realm, and she was gathering her troops and assessing their readiness. And one of her commanders was the same administrator that was talking to the spider. And after the meeting was over, the demon lord walks off on her own while the other members of the council dispersed. The administrator stays behind and chats with the demon lord, and they talk about the time they met and they reminisce, and the flashback of it was when they were together in the labyrinth when she was a spider. So eventually the spider girl we're following is going to be the demon lord that is threatening humanity. So how the story is told is, how in many series that they would tell you what the protagonist was going to do, like Luffy's aspirations, Naruto's aspirations, Deku's aspirations. They're going to be like, I'm going to do this, right? And some stories foreshadow that by showing you a clip or like a short segment of what they're going to be like when they achieve that task. What the story did was they're showing you the first parts of her journey evolving, getting out of the labyrinth, and they're also showing you what she is like after she became OP, but there are two separate stories, as in the first story is her evolving into being her better self, learning to stand up for herself, defend herself, being more powerful. And the second story is the prince's story of him being a hero, growing up, achieving his goals, trying to become like his brother, and the great threat that is facing him, his brother, their kingdom, and the humanity as a whole is the demon lord, and that is a great evil that he has to overcome. And the story is told in a way that you think that both events of her evolving and the prince growing up are happening at the same time, but in reality she had spent 15 years growing into the demon lord, and now where she's at, she has become a threat to humanity. So she is now the catalyst for the princess growth to become a hero. And that clever twist and the ambitious storytelling mechanisms that the series is attempting is what really made me fall in love with the show. They took the very generic typical shonen protagonist aspects, as in the hero being low-level creature or the construction of the isekai anime protagonist shonen genre, like something like Konosuba or Slime Isekai, where the main guy isn't really OP from the get-go and he has to evolve to get there. Well, Konosuba is not really about that, it's more comedic, but the same plot of the hero not having all the epic powers right from the get-go, and they have to evolve to get there to become those like OP isekai protagonists that we all know. And they took the generic anime isekai harem king plotline and they merged them in a way that they feed off each other, where you're watching watching both unfold at the same time, creating a cohesive story, but at the same time, you're watching one influence the other. And that clever storytelling mechanism is what made the story really pop for me and what really blew me away, because I have never seen any anime attempt something like this. The only other show I have seen attempting something like this was more Witcher, but that was more of a very jumbled storyline rather than having a point, because at the end of the day, whether you knew whether it was happening at the same time or the timeline was kind of jumbled up really made no difference for the story. But this was really incredible. So after the 9th episode ends, after she met the administrator, you skip over to the 10th episode, where the story explicitly tells you that the events from the future, where the princess, and the stories we perceive as the present, where the spider is, are two different timelines, because they use an old man to tell the story of his interaction with the spider, the main character, as a flashback. So the story firmly cements that yes, the events are separated by 15 years, and within those 15 years she becomes the demon lord. So now the story isn't, oh, is she going to survive this? Is she going to live to see the next day, or is she going to defeat the monster? It's how did she become the demon lord, and why is she waging war against humanity? Those are very interesting questions that the show gradually answers. And when you get to the 11th episode, those questions are answered to a certain degree, where she fully unlocks her skill called Taboo. It's a skill that she attained in the first episode when she cannibalized the other spider. Taboo is a skill that you earn by doing something taboo, like cannibalism or using dark arts or something. And the more proficient you are at taboo or using taboo skills, the higher level you are and the more you unlock. So she unlocked, initially she unlocked heretic magic, then she unlocked abyssal magic, then she unlocked ruler of pride, then the ruler of patience. And she has now a ruler class. A ruler class is a ruling monster that she has the ability to dominate other creatures, being the ruler. The villain, also from the princess class line, has the emperor skill, which makes him potential candidate for being an emperor. And likewise, our main character has unlocked the skill of demon lord, which makes her a candidate for being the demon lord. But the thing is now, why is she becoming the demon lord? And that lies in the very basic scenario of the hero's journey, in which the hero is called to action and receives some aid. He begins his transformation, gets help, then faces challenges, then has a revelation. The transformation the hero begins, they atone, then they return home. And within that very basic formula for telling an adventure story, you find where our protagonists, the prince and the spider, lie, because they're both facing a great threat, and throughout their journey to become strong, they face many adversities. But at the end of the day, there is a great threat looming over them. For the prince, it's straightforward. There is a demon lord that is invading them. But for the spider, it lies in the skill of taboo, because when you unlock taboo, the final level of taboo, all the hidden knowledge of the world is unloaded on you. Basically, all the lost knowledge of the world, everything that has happened, every skill, every cell there is, it becomes apparent to you. And when our main protagonist understood that, even though she couldn't fully process all the information she had received, she realized one thing, that if nothing changed in their world, that their reality that they currently exist in, that isekai world, it was going to be destroyed. And she needed to be powerful to avert that disaster. So she seeks more power, eventually making her the demon lord. So her quest to save the world from destruction leads her directly down the path of being the greatest evil in that world. And that series of events leads the prince on hero's journey, where he has to slay the demon lord, and how those stories are influencing each other, and how both heroes are pursuing their goals to save the world, and that the story is being told at the same time, and how cohesive the story is why you should watch. So what? I'm a spider. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. Hope you learned something new, because after all, this is the only place on YouTube you can get a proper animation. If you liked, enjoyed, like, sub, and all that. If you didn't, you wasted 7 minutes of your life and you're not getting that back. Okay, ciao!